who will tell you something about his own background, but he has founded a very, very successful school, but he's gone beyond that and done all kinds of incredible networking. He's been very, very loyal to Arrow, and we published his book, which is one of our best sellers ever. And we have copies of it here. What you see out there is all we have. So he's going to sign copies of it, you know, right after we're done with this session. Stuart Grauer.
Little and bottom at the top. No help on it.
Well, you could use a little help.
No help on it.
Just call on me if you need a little help.
Do you need any help? Do you need any help? I can handle this job all by myself. Little bitty booger, cute as a button and a sweet as sugar. I'm gonna buy her diamond ring and we'll get married in the spring.
Do you need any
no help on it?
Could you use a little
no,
help?
no help on it.
Just call on me if you need a little help.
Do you need any help? Do you need any help? No, I can handle this job all by myself. Well, she called me her little piggy wiggy, and I call her my little thingamajiggy. Every time I ask her for a kiss, I can hear the voice sound something like this.
Do you need any
No help on it.
Could you use a little help?
No help on it.
Just call on me if you need a little help.
Do you need any help? Do you need any help? I can handle this job all by myself. Well, I'm gonna take her honky-tonky tonight, and we're gonna do everything upright. When the music starts, we'll swing and sway. We're gonna dance till the break of day.
Do you need any help?
No help on
Well,
it.
you could use a little help.
No help on it.
Just call on me if you need a little help.
Do you need any help? Do you need any help? I can handle this job all by myself.
This is the kickoff night of the conference, and I want to thank you all for coming. I hope it goes well for you. Gracias for coming. I like greeting that way because I'm from Southern California, and because it has the word grace in it. I'll be your storyteller tonight. I've been searching for slow education, like a slow cooking movement, a schooling that's handmade, a nature-infused, free-range type of schooling, colorful, celebratory, blessed, soaked in story and elder wisdom. I've been looking for curiosity-driven, curandero education. I've found plenty of it. And I found that people practicing it need most of all one thing: permission, acknowledgement, the simple knowledge that you are doing good work and must proceed if it feeds your soul. The simple knowledge. You're not data points. We need to know your stories. To some of us, it can seem like school districts and many schools and many teachers want students to live like fish in an aquarium. The teachers and the role models I'm writing about do not. I understand that the educational community and its preeminent researchers, governing bodies, and think tanks do not particularly want to hear stories of teachers, even though they're fond of saying that they do. But here are a few of them in this next hour for you. And I know that in an hour, your mind is liable to have time to wander to your own stories. and hopefully based on some of the simple story models that I'll share with you tonight and some of the varied landscapes that I hope set your imagination off. I want to be your storyteller. I want, with this talk today, to show how we can ennoble teachers and our own journeys through story. I want to honor your journey and empower and encourage you to tell your journey. I'm Stuart Grauer. I live in Encinitas, California, one of those Southern California towns where we drive around with surfboards on top of our cars. This is important. The location of the Grauer School, a small school I founded for developing humanitarian education for teens. We have 2 surf teams that ride clean local waves, and we stay fit and happy that way. This is important because great schools, historically, are the best expressions of what is right and real about their own communities. To start this story, back in 1990, after I was finished with my doctoral work at the University of San Diego, 5 years of potatoes for dinner, lettuce sandwiches, I knew where I wanted to be. So I drove around town, checking the surf every chance I could get, searching for a school site, until I found a shopping mall landlord. He used to be a farmer, and he said this to me: "I lack education. Just pay me rent when you get your students." So the Grauer School started with 7 students in 1991 on credit cards and a borrowed storefront. The school is successful today as a nonprofit public charity and as an incubator of great ideas about secondary education and life preparation. Its many honors include being named as a UNESCO Associate School. It's a LEED Green School. It's been named one of the top 10 places to work in the United States by Outside Magazine. And like many of your schools, we're small by design, 160 students. If your school is at one stage of development or another, there's a good chance that our school has been through it or engaged in it. So I know small schools work. Pretty much 100% of our graduates who seek them are offered generous college scholarships. It doesn't matter if it's private, nonprofit, independent, charter, school within a school. If you stick with it and you have a thick skin and don't mind baked potatoes for dinner, a small alternative school can work great. And you will deal with families of dying students, heroin addiction, incomprehensible pain and fear, every imaginable family issue. Small schools do not offer a big buffer between school and family, and you must maintain staunch resistance to feelings of powerlessness. The wonderful Deb Meyer stood before our Aero Assembly and blew my mind about 2 years ago in saying, "The purpose of schooling is to prepare students for a place of privilege in our society." I assume this means they're no longer held down and that education is essentially a lifting up. But here's something Deb did not cover. What happens when you actually do appear to succeed? What about if you are so successful that you find yourself rubbing elbows with the privileged? What happens then to your claim to radical work for the common man? What do you do then? You want success and prosperity, but if you get it, it can feel like an oasis. You question if it is real. This was an unintended outcome for me after some years, so I started giving away what I could. We took our scholarships from 7% to 11% to 25%, including every year a first-generation college path, and then started an endowment on track now to give financial aid to half of all students. And I formed the Small Schools Coalition to study what makes small schools great and giving that away. We have well over 300 members. You can join. And I've been consulting for free all over the world, including for quite a few of you. School, or a place of peace within intractably corrupt, upsetting, gigantic systems like some of today's large district and state systems is an uphill battle, well worth fighting. Woody Guthrie said, "The world is filled with people who are no longer needed and who try to make slaves of us all. And they have their music, and we have ours." As schools become more monolithic, people of decency, grace, and faith are having their dignity and heritage and prospects taken from them by bureaucrats, corporations, and governments filled with people whose main goal is not to teach. We have to fight for them. The first story I want to tell you today is about this fight. It's a good background story about millionaires and billionaires. It happened about 5 years ago. I saw that the Gates Foundation, founded by Microsoft founder Bill Gates, was studying small schools. And so as a small school scholar, I began following their research. The Gates Foundation had guessed that small schools could do well. So they hired a fresh group of researchers to grant more of them and to measure their performance. Maybe small schools were the big answer. Because of Gates's name, the Gates Small School Initiative attracted many people and many schools. Everyone wants to be funded by Gates. He has so much money. The early results of the Gates Foundation study looked good, and the schools they were studying at first were all small, and they performed well. Everyone wanted to get into one of these schools, so they grew. Over the next 2 or 3 years, growth kept creeping into these schools until many had over 400 or even 500 students in each. So in the end, the Gates Foundation was not studying small schools. Now, for the conclusion of the story, I'm going to tell you their research finding. The research showed that small schools don't really work. What does this mean? This makes an excellent opening question. Why don't small schools work? Now, after 8 years of research on this topic, I'm very sure about the answer. Small schools do not work if they are not small. I called up Bill Gates and he said, "Stuart, thank you for this great work and insight. We really appreciate being corrected. We're going to give you a grant for $1 million to actually develop real small schools." Of course, that's a tall tale. Gates moved on to pandemics and data mining, and I know he must have a big heart, but those guys really damaged our movement. Here's what's not a tall tale. Based on my years of research into the matter, if your learning community does not have less than 400 people in it, and optimally less than about 230, it is not a small school, and we have overwhelming research to demonstrate this. It will lack the safety, connectedness, tribal sense of belongingness, teacher staying power, and performance of a true small school. And we have much more than data on this. As they say, data is stories with the tears removed. I've wanted my story writing to ennoble actual people. Gates showed me. The smart money is in violence and big data, not in small schools or real alternative educators. So I write stories about real and fearless teachers to help show what's great about them. All you cowboys, fight for your land, Woody said. I've caught up with fearless teachers in the South Seas, the coast of Spain, the mountains of the Alps, the jam cities of Korea and China, Cuba, Indian reservations, the Pacific Northwest, the worn-out mining towns of Wales. I've been up and down both U.S. coasts meeting cowboy teachers and renegades like a lot of you. And so Jerry invited me up here to tell you some of their stories. It's my first time in Portland, like some of you. Here's a story about how elders were becoming teachers up in a remote Alaskan outpost from my 2012 book, Real Teachers. We'd heard that the schools were still small up in the Alaskan frontier, so we flew up to Anchorage, drove far out the Kenai Peninsula toward the edge of civilization. Alaska is America's last frontier. what would the teachers be like? We drove past beach fronts with no footprints, grizzly bears chomping on salmon, and eventually reached the end of the road. We could drive no more. Kachemak Bay, bald eagles along the side of the road. So, to keep going, we boarded a single-engine Cessna 207 at Homer Air, piloted by a 21-year-old bush pilot named Ricky, headed south toward the end of the peninsula, passing bay after bay along the Cook Inlet. Then, just before leaving Alaskan airspace entirely, Ricky bore full speed upon the last mountain on Kenai, the last landmass between us and the open North Pacific Ocean. And it appeared the only possible course would be for him to crash straight into that mountain. And we were slack-jawed. And then Ricky banked a hard hairpin turn and carried him straight into a perfect one-wheeled sandy beachfront landing onto a crescent beach. We wobbled out of the plane onto the damp sand and pebbles of Nanwalek Bay and found the tribal youth coordinator, Daryl Kuhn, there to greet us and to introduce us to the local school principal. The Nanwalek are descended from coastal people and have probably fished the Alaskan waters for about 7,500 years. But none of this heritage had been in the schools for several generations. For generations now, Nanwalek had become a breeding ground for obesity, diabetes, and depression, and state-imposed standard city education. Why? First off, because the U.S. government had put an end to tribal schools and tried to make everyone be American, trying to cleanse Native Alaskans of who they were through schooling. About when that era was ending, the Nanwalek school might have had a chance to recover their eroded culture. This was a few summers back now. The salmon had finally spawned upstream in Nanwalek for the year and set out on their migration. But most of these salmon would not return for generations. This would be their last run. Because by day 11, after the Exxon Valdez oil spill, the Nanwalek elders sat in the tribal hall passing around the salmon jerky, and they could see the black slick gliding onto their beach. The jerky tasted savory and rich, and from then on, there would be precious little of it. A little bit of black seal meat they had in home stores would become the rarest of delicacies because crude oil on a seal's fur destroys the insulation, leaving the seal to freeze to death. And of course, with no salmon getting upstream, there would be no bear coming around, and Guy the bear hunter could have no posse of young ones to teach. The local education was already corrupted or gone, but now the age-old ways and rituals of subsistence, of eating off the land, were about to degenerate too. To make matters worse, the United States government, to help, began shipping in generations' worth of high salt, high sugar, processed diabetes food, stuff that could never have grown out of the ground. It's the American way, big and standard. Last year, 1 billion boxes of frozen waffles like Eggo were sold. 1 billion no-nutrition, high-fat, high-sugar, high-salt, low-fiber diabetes fuel was pumped into our population. Much of it is part of our U.S. federal farm subsidy program that is making us all sick. Anyway, when an environmental... Only at an Aero conference can we laugh at this. Anyway, when an environmental disaster strikes a remote, marginalized, traditional population, the toxicity creeps not only into their land and wildlife, but into their spirit and culture, into their schools. It took us about 8 months to get permission to visit. We arranged a ceremony to meet the villagers in the tribal hall. At last, they were smoking salmon again, and the bear were coming back. Guy had taken 3 bears this season, and he taught us a little tracking. There in the tribal hall, we learned that no matter what governments do, great people strive to keep their traditional cultures alive. Hunters I have met have always told me that bear meat is hardly worth eating. It's too hard to cook. But the Nanwalek bear was tender. They still could cook it. It tasted like lamb. The students I was traveling with couldn't get enough of the bear and salmon jerky. In my opinion, this is how culture is passed down more than from state curricula. Passing down community and culture is what great schools do. And here's where the story gets wild. Dinner and ceremony wound down, and it was time for a dance party. Our students and the Nanwalek teens moved onto the floor together, except they were not doing the California dances or the rock and roll dances. They formed a circle and danced the seal dance and the bear dance, dances their great-grandparents and their own elders made up long ago to mimic the movements of the animals that give them sustenance. It was a full revival. Meanwhile, their parents, the current tribal elders, rocked out to 60s music, the Stones and Led Zeppelin, even as the kids danced the dances of long ago. Later on, when the Alaskan government suggested that their school be closed and they be ferried over to large, standardized, consolidated schools, I don't have to tell you how those people kicked, and they still have their school. Governments grow by making schools bigger and trying to make everyone the same curriculum, the same teacher training, packaged like frozen Eggos. In small schools, we form real connected communities where everyone interacts like a tribe. What was happening in Nanwalek was that the elders, the grandparents, were once again vital in the community. They were not only teaching the old dances, they were actually coming into the schools every week all year and teaching the names of the berries, and the old indigenous language was in revival. The old recipes, the old songs and lore. The Nanwalek have reclaimed their school. The elders are nobles again, and as I hope they are in your school. And I hope that you'll write about them and revere them. That story became widely circulated, and I hope you liked it. I didn't start out by being able to take my students to Alaska. Here's a short little story, something like an origin tale, one I like to call garbage pails. And I hope you will write one like this for yourself. Not long ago, someone asked me, when did you know you were a teacher? As you move through your career, there will be many opportunities to quit or to press on. You will correctly identify some problems as intractable, and you will find limits on your own perseverance and resourcefulness. Maybe you'll become a realtor or a district-level official who hardly knows any students. I almost quit early on. Unlike many teachers, I had no role models or forebears in my family, which before me were a lot of preachers and artists. I went about becoming a teacher the hard way. I worked as a lobsterman and bartender and sub-teacher to put myself through grad school. And when I just about threw in the towel in the glutted post-Vietnam teaching market, I finally landed a teaching job in a small school in New York City. It was New York in the 70s. What happened was that I had one of those days when you leave the school in total shock. How many of you have ever left school after a long day with students in a sort of state of shock? Half of you are lying. Or not teachers. How many of you had a day like that? I mean, it was my first year. The high school kids wound me around in circles. Those middle school kids had no discernible conscience. My lesson plans that had taken me 3 hours to lovingly develop fell flat as kids spun out of control. And I walked out of school that day stunned, disenfranchised. Screw teaching. I would become a writer. I knew it. And I walked out into the city streets. I could influence 1,000 people. My first 2 stories had already been picked up by the New York Times. Who needed this? Ungrateful kids, endless lesson planning, bad pay. I crossed the street towards my subway stop. And there on the corner was a cluster of beat-up, dirty aluminum garbage pails, overflowing and awaiting pickup. Jutting out of the top of one was a Time magazine, and on it a headline that drew me in. That would be perfect for my lesson plan tomorrow, I thought, and pulled the magazine out of the garbage, paged the story, and began reading right there on the city sidewalk. In that instant, catching myself red-handed, I knew I was hopelessly a teacher. But it takes a long time to merge your formal teacher training with your street sense. A lot of patience. Garbage pails. If you want to write, tell about your garbage pail or defining moment. We need to hear that. I know you had one. Just as every school has a founding story core to its very existence, every teacher has an origin tale to guide and center them when things get rough. Ultimately, it's not a private moment that keeps you in this field. It is a community. Here's a little yarn I think of as when I think of the Nutcracker Suite, though I've never told it before. And this story is ridiculous, but I think you'll agree it has to be told. As a young man, I wanted to ski the Alps, but I couldn't afford a plane ticket. So, after 4 years of intense letter writing, I finagled a job in Switzerland. Skiing and exotic location were the reasons that sounded good. But here was the real reason. I had never really felt confident or connected as a starting teacher. I wanted to belong. And like some of you have found out, we might have to leave our own culture to belong. So, when the unexpected job came up and a telegram, in a handful of days I had dispersed most of my worldly possessions and was airborne. In a little town outside Basel, Switzerland, I had to walk across a castled moat to get to work every day. To stay fit, I soon learned that some of the men in the school had formed a gym fitness club, so I joined. We did workouts 2 or 3 times a week in the shiny, spacious gymnasium next door to the old castle. Along about November, a new instructor was introduced to us, an unlikely one. It was a super fit, charismatic dance teacher, a beautiful young blonde woman. Now, to understand this story, you need to appreciate that every area of Switzerland has its own dialect of Swiss German language. And I was picking up maybe 1 in 3 words at that point, doing a lot of gesturing and nodding and getting along. So when she started teaching us ballet moves, I just took it on faith that she was nothing more than an interesting guest. But she came back the next session, and all the next week, and the next. We were, at least in part, becoming a ballet troupe. Now, I don't want to cast any judgment, but I have to say, and no Swiss would deny it, that the Swiss men are built thick and strong in general, and that the word graceful is not among the first words that might come to mind in describing them. This was Dumbo the Elephant ballet troupe all the way. These hopeless lessons continued with the greatest camaraderie and humor till late December, at which point we knew an entire scene from the Nutcracker Suite. Magically, my Swiss German, along with my adjustment to the faculty, into the faculty grew secure and humorous for the first time in my young career. A great school is not a building or a faculty. It is a community. Just like a great class, the faculty is a team. And after traveling 6,000 miles to a foreign land, now I was on one. At last, the performance day arrived. One beautiful teacher showed up with size large black tights and pink tutus, and we were told to don them like a team. The close the door, stand and deliver, then go home teaching practice may appear to work fine in large bureaucratic schools, but it does not work for great schools that do the job of building real community. The research is overwhelming. Teamwork in organizational settings is a vital aspect of creating a well-oiled machine and to creating a happier, higher motivation, inclusive, and safer environment. At our school, we evaluate our best teachers based upon how on the team they are, not just what happens when they close the door. Have you had a meaningful Nutcracker Suite time on your faculty, with your people? A time of creating ties that bind you? When did you know you were on a real team? I hope you are, and that you'll write about that. I'm a former member of a men's ballet troupe, a team that performed the Nutcracker Suite before the entire village of Bottming in Switzerland, before all of our students, families, and neighbors on their New Year's Eve gathering. One of the craziest experiences of my life, and one of the best. With humor, we can toss out presumptions and baggage and politics that come on faculties, and this is a constant effort. A great school is not about talent. It is about belongingness, mentoring, connection, and tribe. And maybe the Nutcracker Suite. Many of you are starting schools or have young schools, and some have struggled or will. When I started the Grauer School, we determined to do things differently, to peel back the veneer of worn-out and unhelpful school conventions that did not serve kids. What would we call the teacher? Was our first big transformational question. I remember the time well, of course, the beautiful tabula rasa founding days. And I think the rabbi poet Lawrence Kushner says it in a way that I keep coming back to. This is the setting out, the leaving of everything behind, leaving the social milieu, the preconceptions, the definitions, the language, the narrowed field of vision, the expectations. No longer expecting relationships, memories, words, or letters to mean what they used to mean. To be, in a word, open. For me, openness was this. I gave half of some of my seats away to the school so local people could have access. I talked to teachers about being connectors, nutcracker dancers, not just subject area specialists. Behind closed doors. Were we mentors? Were we coaches? Were we facilitators? Trainers. A headline in the nation's largest teaching journal recently read, "Anyone can be a teacher." Is that so? Historically, teachers are the highest stature of society. Were we gurus? That means teacher. And sage. What about leader, we wondered? Should we use that as the title? Followers called Jesus rabbi. We looked it up. It means teacher. We deliberated what name to use for this much maligned term of teacher, and eventually we arrived at the most revered name we had ever known, a name worthy of ultimate respect, and we use it to this day. Teacher. Confucius, Aristotle, Albert Einstein all reached the highest respect as society could ever offer, and after attaining that ultimate respect, went by the title of teacher. We would just have to use that word better. How can we reclaim the meaning of this word, teacher? Can I have a thumbs up if, in your efforts to be an educator, you have experienced opposition, isolation, rejection, failure, frustration, threat? I think that's 100%. Let's show that, because if you will succeed as a teacher, I advise you now, you better be excited by threat. Survivors are. Sure, there's the initial shock after the incident, but after the time you need, the feeling of threat is exploded by your excitement. If threat makes you no more than momentarily lost, for no more than a couple of days, you might succeed as an alternative educator. They say it's lonely to get to the future first. If you're taking novel or radical approaches, expect threats, isolation, more. Tim and Elizabeth from Flint, Michigan, pioneered inner-city gardening called Heirloom Peace Gardens. They understood learning the wonder and power of plants. They began teaching students to look down more when walking across a lawn and appreciate all those plants once called weeds. Right in the middle of a decaying city. They set up a free library with a food garden theme inside the new downtown farmers market. What could be more needed, more intuitively right, more universal in goodness? Gardens for school kids in the world's first post-apocalyptic city. Tim wrote to me recently. Our project grows strong here, in the lead-plagued capital of the world. Such irony. Elizabeth left her post in October with depression, largely because forces in our school-university partnership opposed her path of social justice for the people of Flint. Administrators love numbers, not justice. Bureaucracies love gray, not green. This expression of dissatisfaction with heavily bureaucratized education has a powerful history, not even counting Socrates millennia ago, who was given poison hemlock for his efforts. 100 years ago, Rabindranath Tagore set up schools in Bengal in protest of British colonial school. Outdoor classes, stories, music and art were all the focus. No exams. Ceremony was part of daily routines. Later, forest schools, Reggio Emilia programs, and a multitude of Arrow schools focused on authentic relationship building, moral values, nature, and art. Alternative schools teach the human heart. And in these places, rejection, depression, and burnout will always be a risk. Tim, your story is essential. Elizabeth, we're with you. I quit too, but I'm staying on the job. Data are stories with the tears removed. We need an inspiration to keep up and to keep going. Here's a keep going poem I keep coming back to again and again, and I want you to have it for that reason. It's one of the most beautiful and true expressions of leadership and what that is like that I know. It's by William Stafford, called The Way It Is. There is a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you're pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. Jerry wanted me to tell stories, and that's some old, some new, some borrowed, and some blue. And I've written 2 books of stories over the past 4 years in an effort to hold on to that thread in a data-crazed, digitally consumed world. The larger educational community is not exactly screaming for stories, even richly told ones, even though most of them love explaining that stories are what we need. So I have delivered quite a few conferences and stories in praise of teachers, and it's been gratifying. You can get Fearless Teaching right here. I only have 999 left. Publishers Weekly calls Fearless Teaching vivid, at times poetic stories of freedom, play, and happiness to inspire teachers. Jerry Minks calls it amazing, and I appreciate that. But I can guarantee you this, your stories are at least as good. Looking back over 4 decades of hanging around teens, I sometimes feel that I accidentally succeeded with them, even though I did everything the opposite of the way people expected me to do it. But more often, I'm watching my back, and we build our movement of small schools where relationships are the priority. I've been helping many people start or advance small community-based schools. I do this through consulting and also through writing stories that I hope you will use, if not steal. It's the age of big. 120 years of unrelenting school size increasing. These are the days of big systems and big schools, metal detectors, armed guards at the kindergarten doors. As I say, the smart money is in violence. There's a school shooting a week in our country now. More. Education as a whole in the U.S. is in a state of criticality, driven by bigness. But here you are, arrows, Small school people, community builders, non-systems people, the real people. There'll be virtually no violence at your school if it is less than 200 or so. You won't be getting the smart money, but hopefully you won't be getting shot either. Themed and meaningful stories about schooling do not need to be long. Here's a 2-sentence story. As a tourist at a tourist restaurant on a beach somewhere, the waiter said his name was Ivan from Serbia. So we asked him if he'd seen the terrible war back in 1999. Yes, he said. I was a boy and we all loved it. There was no school for many months. I'm no longer in the public system. Personally, did not get the oxygen I needed there. But many do. That's just what happened, not a statement. I understand that this is where most of the work has to occur. I've been tenured, unionized, put good years into it, and I see the benefits. I still consult with many such families and teachers. Willie Nelson was being interviewed, and they asked him, Willie, you think you'll get married again? And he said, no, I'm just going to find a woman who hates me and buy her a really expensive house. The point is, there could be no public education to warm youthful bodies and minds until the country recovers the courage and humor necessary to exercise the art of imagination. Courage and humor that is beyond the next brave new ideological foment our national politicians parade before us. In every institution of every size, the real stuff, the best stuff, is not institutional and system. It's personal. It's parlor. It's you. From globally to locally, we're defining school in a narrow and overpriced way. Servant of the state and downloader of the standard curriculum. And for many, it can be anti-democratic, unliberating, toxic, unjoyful. I'm here to offer stories of community leaders, thought leaders, mentors, and people who you'd go to for wisdom or advice, even if they were not assigned to you. They'd be called teacher. Safe in our classrooms, we leave out mystery of self, the spirit of learning, preferring to seek the known, which is strange if you explore meanings of words like teacher and education. I'll wind down with one last story for you, a far-out one I like to call The Black Horse of Tahiti, about a man who quit and stayed in his job. Patrick Borlego is one of the best surfers I know. He's a warm water ocean wave attacker from the South Seas who is holding on to the thread. Patrick, by day, misses many of the best waves in his role as principal of the Pow Pow School on the island of Moorea. After a magic early morning surf session at a perfect reef pass I'm not at liberty to name, we pulled a palm frond-wrapped breadfruit we had picked from the hillside behind Patrick's house out of the coals and sliced it up for breakfast. A neighbor wandered by with some lobster he just pulled out of the water. It was Patrick's friend, Arsène Hariho, the legendary surfer they call the Black Horse. Arsène has dark eyes and the somber effect of a heavy surf rider. He has encountered forces of nature that would silence most people. The actual Polynesian word to describe this affect would be mana. And it might be teachable to city kids, but not directly, and not to people whose life and survival are not tied to natural forces. The things that happen on land are the small things to the South Sea Islanders. Filled up, Patrick and I departed from Arsène and a few other surfers who had gathered around, and we drove up the coconut palm-fringed coastline, past a house on stilts, a fisherman's beached handmade outrigger canoe nestled under the shade of a banyan tree, a stand with a fresh-caught shiny yellow and green dorado, fish hanging and ready to be sliced up into sushi that would squish sublimely under your tongue. A large wooden fishing boat broken to pieces on a shore from a day that must have been terrible and heavy. Things looked idyllic on that day, though, but one can see that the locals live with elements that can be unforgiving. Then heading north, we passed a couple high-end international resorts which provide tourists with a friendly caricature of the top tropical island life imported from Europe and the States. Soon we pulled into the Pow Pow School with its green roofs blending into the surrounding jungle that rose abruptly. Giant cumulus clouds backed up into the sharp, mossy green mountains, cloistering the little school like a lost world. The language was all French, but for sure, we are not in France. This is Patrick's other life, and he graciously allowed me to take over some classes. I was at first surprised by something. The curriculum is tightly controlled by the French government. In other words, the teachers here in French Polynesia are expected to teach the same things as the teachers in the brick schools of Paris. I wonder all sorts of things. Will they study the Reo Ohi language and the spirit it conveys? The great Ta'aroa, ocean god? Will their history be covered as a primitive folk tale and footnote to French history, covered in 5 minutes while they spend 2 weeks on the European Middle Ages? One more week maybe on the French Renaissance. Millennia ago, the Polynesian forefathers, in brave journeys across the oceans, navigated water currents, wind, and stars of complexity we can still hardly comprehend, to conjure and track destinations so that they could continue to live. Their ancient ones, who named this island chain Rising Sun, wove magic stories, elders who hurled stars to protect their children. Does it matter that these students have a completely different heritage than Parisian kids? How can Patrick even allow this loss of a world? Is he really just a government bureaucrat? A colonialist? I ask him. How can kids from both cultures possibly need the same schooling, Patrick? He casts his eyes down and looks resigned, bored even. There's no point in confronting a history of such great confusion and loss. Before lunch, I have something to show you, he replies. We adjourn to Patrick's office for mugs of coffee with Eagle brand. I drink. Patrick dutifully gathers folders and documents for me while I sit on a flat sofa with aluminum arm rails and sip the lukewarm, sugary drink that reminds me of days out at sea. He hands me a crisp stack of French curricular documents from the French Department of Education. National Core Study, quote, to assist core French teachers at the grade K6 levels by providing the parameters for the delivery of the program, etc., etc. This is the last thing I want to carry around with me in Polynesia. I have no idea why he's giving it to me, except I was worried that he thought it was his duty. I scanned the opening page, which says, as we move rapidly towards the 21st century, its challenge is to offer students a school experience that reflects a contemporary something. The coffee's done, and Patrick signals expeditiously, come with me. We board his van, silently round a few bends in the road until we reach a sandy beachfront sheltered darkly with dense palms and a shack where small fiberglass catamarans were lined up on racks and on the sand. Outside, in the calm turquoise bay, the little ones, Patrick's students, are learning the art of sailing right in the middle of the school day. In this place, Patrick looked nothing like he did back at the school office. His eyes gleamed as he pointed to one after another little sailor managing the bright yellow and orange sails, all future watermen. From the boats, the little ones waved at him with delight. On the beachfront, several little ones were puzzling over block and tackle setups with resolution we saw nowhere on the campus. Doesn't all this sailing cut directly into the time these kids are supposed to be studying the core state curriculum? I asked. Won't this affect their test scores? What are you risking here, Patrick? Yes, he says with a grin. The department thinks there really is no time for this at all. But I tell them sailing will raise their scores. This is one of those statements that is much truer than the kind of truth you can prove. Patrick knows intuitively that joy raises scores. We recognize educational artists because they make our blood rush, and they do more than define us as fellow refugees. They anchor us deeply into whatever heritage we might tap into as teachers. I had more questions, but just then Patrick saw a student on the shoreline heading for a landing, and he moved quickly to the water's edge to help. This one could be the next black horse one day, and he would need mana to be strong and skilled against the elements and hospitable in the ways of Polynesia. I'm going to end my storytelling with that today. Thank you for listening to these few stories. Gracias. Thank you for your gift of pedagogy and your open heart. As I travel around schools, it sometimes seems that there is more to unlearn than to learn. Each school and class has its own flavor, like none other, and that flavor transcends the measurable and enriches us with its art and its value. I'll never forget the musky flavor of the Nanwalek School and the bear prints in the mud only a few feet away from our trail. The exotic turning sun and spicy mornings at the Pow Pow School. The burnished leathery Harkness rooms of Exeter Academy. The brown loamy earthen way of the schools hacked into the Panamanian mangroves. Flavors make schools essential, and in each place there are educational artists, and the school is their palate. All the world is nudging us to give up our gift in favor of sameness, of quality, the artless and the tasteless, odorless rankables. A Harvard history professor assigned her students the task of spending 3 hours looking at a single work of art in an art museum. Initially, they're horrified, and she said, but by hour 3, they're seeing all sorts of things they hadn't noticed in hour 1. Biology teachers say the same things of tide pools. Last year in America, 8,000 preschoolers were suspended from school. A Midwest school wanted an activity and homework-free night, and it took 6 months to plan. A school headmaster banned having best friends. Others have banned hugging. Courses of study are turned into great textbook races. Careers into prescriptions, and students are anxiously ranked and rated. Even in good communities, great colleges, and worthy service locations you go to, and in preschools, you may find exhausted and anxious people, and you will experience their judgment. Take nothing personally. It does take work to get beyond the day-to-day and into the art of it all. We can't always do this. There'll be no end to the profound boredom and powerlessness, maybe alcoholism and AIDS, depression, overcrowded poverty, intractable problems, water wars and refugees, and they have their flavors too. You'll find them even in garbage pails and finished lives or careers. Through more kinds of threat than I can detail today, I've been driven by a simple mantra, and here it is for you. Do good work. If you drop out and find new people, another school, do good work. You will succeed if you don't care how long that takes. If you stay on your job, carry on the revolution, take heart in your own subversive good work. What I love about alternative educators is their implicit understanding that schools are refreshed from the outside, somehow from the whole of life, so they are more than zoos, that students can actualize, and so that we can serve to liberate our students rather than control. Thank you again, Jerry and Wiley. and the organizers and all you presenters and volunteers and all you alternative educators looking for beautiful pathways, people with stories. Thank you for your stories, your art, and your songs and poems. Welcome to Arrow Night 1. In 3 or 4 days' time, I think we'll have many more stories to tell. Gracias, peace. Let us stay gently amused through it all. Let us do good work. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for a few questions, then Stuart's going to go out. We have these books ready for people to purchase and to have signed. And then remember, at 8:30, we're going to have the World Cafe. Couple of questions?
I'm not off the hook. Questions? Right there, young lady.
What about the plot of the United States, in this case, or other countries, to use, quote, education as a way of dehumanizing people and destroying the world?
Every regime, every state government has a variety of purposes for education. This afternoon we heard that how economic security was one of them, but certainly national security is another. Cultural diversity is yet another. Federal governments have their own agendas, and they always will. And I don't think that we can do anything about that. And so I'm telling you, do good work. And I'm here as an alternative educator. So the work has to continue.
You talked about the ideal size for a small school being under 400 or even better, under 230.
Right.
What about, like, what's too small? You know, the other direction, numbers-wise.
Every model has various optimal sizes, just like class size. So if I'm having a conversation, that might be one-on-one. 12 is a classic number for a class size. I happen to love 7 for certain intellectual circles. Same with school size. I had a good conversation today with the folks from the preschool in Portland, and we kind of decided that 60, 65 was a pretty good max number for an open free school. But I'm talking when I'm talking about numbers of for a slightly more traditional but still alternative, like a college prep school. 60 might be a little small. Better on the upward side of that, up to 150, 200, 225. There's a lot of really good research on this, so I've had a lot of fun with it. I've been studying not just school size research, but organizational size research, sociology and anthropology and tribe size and so on, and I recommend that. You have to fit it to your school.
One more question. Okay.
Hi, what do we need to do to get you to come visit our school in Oklahoma?
I would love to. I've never been to Oklahoma. I'd be happy to come there and consult if it sounded like your situation was one where I could be of service.
That'd be awesome. Working farm, play-based elementary school.
Sounds beautiful.
Okay, thanks a lot. Stuart Grauer. There's a limited number of books available out there, so if you want to get him to sign one of them and you want to read them, just go ahead out and grab one.